Last week, I examined this list of 56 questions to ask an atheist on a website called Enlightio. It's a website with a lot of random stuff, and there's even a set of social skill questions like this 1,000 random conversation starters, parens the ultimate list. So it's not a proselytizing site. It really is trying to embrace a sense of curiosity and interest in the world. So I looked at it as just a list of questions to ask an atheist. But I didn't really explore the answers to those questions then, and a few stuck with me. They were new to me, and I thought I'd like to answer them and go in a little bit more detail. So here we go. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and a skeptic, and I love questions for atheists. I'm fascinated by what the questions are, what they say about the person asking the question, why they're being asked in the first place. And this Enlightio website, it has me intrigued. It does really seem to be about curiosity and an interest in the world, and not really trying to get you to believe in anything in particular, but learn about other people. So let's look at 5 questions today and see what I say about them. The first question I'm interested in exploring is number 4 on their list. Do you think there's anything inherently wrong with believing in God? So first, I just find the framing of this very strange. Like, why would there be anything inherently wrong in an action that really doesn't cause any harm? It just, on its face, just believing in God. Forget what you might believe about a God, because there could be things that you do based on your belief in God that are wrong. But just the inherent belief in a God, why would there be anything wrong with that? And it seems to me this question is coming from an embrace of Christianity and a thought that there are things that are just wrong because they're displeasing to an entity. In their case, it's God, and they call that sin. And as atheists, I think we have to explore these a little bit deeper and ask, so what would be the problem with something like this? And I don't think that this is a question of being right or wrong in the sense of, does this cause harm or not? What I think is that there is something illogical about believing in God, or it's an emotional decision that you have taken. Maybe you've taken it because you were raised with it, or you were convinced for emotional reasons. You felt something in your heart when you went to a service. But there's nothing really inherently wrong with just a belief in God. Now, based on what you can believe about that God and what that God wants you to do, I think that there are bad actions that can follow from that, but that's separate from the belief in a God. So to wrap up, nothing inherently wrong with believing in God, but there could be some bad things you do or wrong things you decide because you're believing something for what I consider bad reasons. Anyway, moving on to question 2 that I'm interested in. Number 8, do atheists sometimes feel they're missing out because they don't believe in God? And really, the answer is no. There's no FOMO because of a lack of belief in God. There have been times when I looked at people who do believe in God and their ease of settling into a community and having people around them to help, because that's so easily built into Christian society that you join a church and there are people to know right away, whereas this is something that if you don't have that, you have to work at, and you have to find something. But that's really separate from not believing in God. That's more the ease of community. But we're going to talk about community a little bit later on. So no FOMO. I don't miss this at all. But this leads us into number 46. How do you deal with the feeling of being alone in your beliefs without a community of like-minded people to support you? Well, first of all, as I said last week when I read this, what an assumption to think that there are no communities of atheists. And in case you're wondering, there are several communities out there that you could join, and you could look for something local if you didn't know about them. Just a Google search for atheist communities or secular communities or free thought communities and the like. The atheist community of Austin is very well known if you're in Texas, and they have a great online presence. So that's one thing I discovered early on. There are many forums where atheists hang out. There's a whole atheist YouTube. So even in the virtual spaces, there are places to go where you could find atheists if you're interested. As I said in the previous question, one of the things when I moved to a new area, I realized other friends who were Christians had moved to other areas and had immediately a whole network of friends. And so that was something that at first I was kind of sad about, let's say, like, oh, this is so hard to make new friends in a new area. I have to make more of an effort. I can't just join a church. Granted, sometimes those friendships are very shallow and they're not as supportive if you change your mind, for example. Now, I would like to say that I don't really feel like I need to always be interacting with atheists. I have friends of all kinds of religions or other people that are more on the fence about it. They don't really call themselves atheists, whatever. We meet up to do other things. I have belonged to several groups where we bond over our interest in that thing. And luckily, Christianity and proselytization just doesn't come up. Most of my friends know that although they can talk about their experiences, I'm not bothered by them talking to me about going to church and things of that matter. But they're not trying to convince me to believe what they believe. And I appreciate that. And that's the same in these groups. That's my main thing. I just wouldn't want to feel the constant pressure of people trying to convince me that their way of thinking about this one question is the one and only correct response. I don't mind people telling me about their church experiences or something they did when they were in church or with their church group. That doesn't bother me. I just take that as any other activity that people do. I just don't want people to try to convince me, do a hard sell constantly, or if they're very Jesus-y, and by that I mean every single thought is about Jesus, every utterance is about Jesus. Not real big fan of that. I would like us to talk about other things. Granted, if that's the way they are, they're probably not going to be around me. And having said all that, I do have a whole community of atheist friends. We don't talk about atheism all that much. I just know that they are atheists. We talk about all kinds of fun things and interesting things. I'm not sure that atheists need to have the quote-unquote like-minded people to support them, because I think we're used to being in a society where people don't think like us, and we're used to that level of difference. And so it's just fine. It's just something you get used to, and you make your way through it. But I would like to reiterate that if you are somebody who is interested in a community, there are plenty of communities out there for you to join, and you could be with them. And especially in a transition phase, if you're coming out of Christianity, it's nice to know that those people exist, that you're not alone. It's not really for other support, though. But I think for Christians, they really do need this kind of herd mindset. They really do need to feel like they're with other people who believe their same thing, and they're used to being dominant, at least in my country, in the United States. All right, having dealt with that, we're moving on to the next question. This one is question number 12. What do atheists think about religious art and architecture? And of course, with these questions, I really would have liked it to be, what do you as an atheist think about religious art and architecture, as opposed to whoever you're asking to be speaking for all of atheists. But anyway, we're just going to take that for what do I think about religious art and architecture. And I have to say, I'm less interested in the actual theme than what the art is doing. And I love medieval art, for example, and most medieval art is religious because it was a very religious society. It's not all religious. I love looking at Romanesque and Gothic churches. I think they're really cool. It's really neat to learn about how they constructed them, how they made them look the way they look. I really enjoy all of that. You have to recognize that at that time, the Catholic Church was the main force throughout the world, had a lot of money, and was putting a lot of that money into a demonstration of its dominance, its power, supposedly also to show its devotion to God. But I care less about that. And I'm just going to repeat, it wasn't all religious. There were fables, there were other stories that were completely secular, a lot of other stuff going on the same topic. I really enjoy a lot of the things that have to do with Greek and Roman mythology. There are a lot of stories, frescoes, mosaics, paintings, all kinds of stuff that deal with those topics, and it's the same thing. I think that they're really cool. I like to look at what's actually going on, the story that's being told in those works. I like the art and architecture that are in other countries, like in India or in Japan, or some of the mosaics that have to do with Islam. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. But I actually think that the question is getting at a couple of other things. One is, I do think that some religious people are bothered by art that does not center God or their religion. And they are troubled by it, and sometimes they don't want it to exist at all. And they think people shouldn't enjoy that. The other thing is, obviously, atheists and other secular people do get upset when the religious art and architecture is in the service of a government which claims to have a separation of church and state. Now, I don't mind if there is some government money and somebody gets the government money and they make a work of art that is religious because that's what they want to do, and it's not a stand-in for the government. What is troubling is when the art or architecture is supposedly representing this fusion of church and state, so God and the government. So you have like Moses on the front of your government building, your state house or whatever, and that's it. Or the Ten Commandments, as if that is the end-all be-all of legalistic thinking. I'm fine if it's one representation among many. So we see lots of, like at Christmas time, you see lots of different things that are representing different traditions because that's representing the community, but it's not a stand-in for the government. So again, if people are creating art and architecture that is religious in nature because that's what they want to do, cool. As long as it's not standing in with my tax dollars for what is supposed to be representing me as a secular person, I have no problem with it. I've also heard the argument stated that without all of that religious art and architecture, we wouldn't have all this great stuff. It wouldn't be beautiful. And I totally reject that concept at all. Now, it's hard to imagine what our past would have looked like, what the art and architecture would have looked like from the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, where there was so much religious themed stuff. But I have no doubt that there would be something, because in Greek times they did do a lot of pottery that had non-God themes. And even in the Middle Ages, as I've already stated, there were fables, there were stories. There was always going to be secular power, your whatever king or whoever the ruler was, whatever you call that person, who were going to build buildings to show how great they were. There is always going to be some secular art and architecture. It would have been a lot more. Anyway, I think I've babbled on enough about that, but the long and short of it is, really, I enjoy all kinds of art and architecture, and it's just, if people are doing that and that's what they want to do, cool. I'm going to judge how it's done, what the story is. I have my own subjective thoughts about whether it's good or not, etc., etc. Let's go on to the fifth and last question we're contemplating today. This one is question 20. How do you deal with doubt or moments when you question your beliefs? And this is one that I was thinking about a lot after I read out the original list of questions, because I realized that I actually don't deal with doubt. I don't deal really with questioning my beliefs, I guess we're going to put it. I do deal with indecision if I need to make a purchase or I'm out to dinner and I have to decide between options. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out which the preferred option is, but eventually I break through. I'm going to decide on something, and I'm usually pretty happy with that. As for doubt, the main thing that I have come to do in my life is not invest my sense of self or my ego into what I believe, so that if new information comes to light, I am able to evaluate that information and decide, is that likely true or not? And I don't worry about, is it really true or not? I just go with what seems to be the best information at the time, knowing that later, if new information comes to light, I can change my mind again. So this is what I think about science. Now, I accept things like evolution and what we call the Big Bang, the expansion of a singularity. I don't understand everything about those, and I'm happy to change my mind about those if science, and I say science as a consensus. Obviously, there are scientists that are working, and they decide as a group which things that they have established are likely true. And I go with that consensus because those are the people working in those fields. Now, I happen to be lucky. I'm a college professor. I know a lot of scientists. I hear what they talk about. I talk with them. So I feel like I can trust that they're doing their best work. They're not trying to mess people up or say things that are wrong. And that's the way I accept science. I sometimes think that there are people, if they don't know scientists, they think, oh, these are just people that are invested in their narrative. That's a question for a different day. But I go with that consensus. if something changed about the way they thought of the beginning of the universe, it wouldn't really impact my life. That's one of the things I think. So if they say, oh, actually there is a God that started it, it'd be like, cool. There's no God. We've determined that there is no God. Cool. Whatever. We've determined this. We've determined there is a multiverse. That's fine. We're living in a simulation. It really isn't going to change what my day-to-day living is. So to worry about whether or not I'm correct in those things, it's not worth it for my own beliefs. Now, somebody might say, oh, don't you sound so wishy-washy? Well, I actually think it's better if you get new information, you change your beliefs. You don't sit there and because you want to be so firm in whatever it is that you're going to say, like, I'm going to reject all new knowledge and I'm never going to change my mind. What I think is wishy-washy is when you have values that you are always willing to compromise because it's easier. So if you say, oh, I really believe in honesty, but if now you're in a situation where you're going to look bad, like you're going to look stupid or something, so you lie, and you're so willing to compromise that value to look good in the moment, that to me is the wishy-washy. It's also wishy-washy if you're just always accepting everybody's declarations as true. So if you listen to your neighbor who says, oh, vaccines are this, and you're like, oh, I guess vaccines are this. Then you read a newspaper article and it says that this person said vaccines are that. Oh, vaccines are that. So that's another wishy-washy way to be, where just anybody who speaks, you just take that as true. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. Again, what I try to do is look at what is the information we have today. What is the consensus about the consensus of experts who work in the field, who've published, who are constantly evaluating, because I'm not there. What are their thoughts on this? And then I weigh these kinds of things. And again, I don't invest my ego in that statement being true. Maybe the information will shift and I will have to make those decisions then. I think making these evaluations is not wishy-washy. I think that this is being a good skeptic in evaluating information. Not taking everybody's information. You have to evaluate it. You have to evaluate the language. You hear lots of complaints about the way the media portrays things. Well, as listeners, we have a role to play in our media experience, and that is look at the words that they're using. Who are the experts or the non-experts or the random person on the street that they're talking to? Evaluate the information based on that. Don't just take information because somebody says that that information is true. Evaluate it. Look at their expertise. Think about it. That's what good skepticism is. Skepticism is not rejecting everything, and skepticism is not accepting everything. It is actually looking at what the value of that piece of information is based on the expertise of the people speaking on it, what the consensus around it is, and things of that nature. So wrapping this up, I actually don't deal with doubts about my beliefs. Now, I think that the question is actually getting at how do you deal with doubts about atheism, as if atheism is a positive belief. But getting back to what atheism is the rejection of a single declarative statement about belief in God. Do you believe in a God or don't you? And I don't. And that's not really a positive statement about belief. It is what I don't believe. It's a rejection of a belief. And so therefore, what I do is I explore that. Obviously, I have this YouTube channel. I watch atheist YouTubes. I listen to Christians talk. I'm not afraid to listen to what people say because, as I've laid out prior, I'm evaluating their statements. I'm thinking about the value of the evidence they're providing. And so up to this point, everybody who believes in Christianity, in my mind, believes it for more emotional reasons. And although they can backfill with arguments or the Bible says this and I believe that or whatever they're doing, it really isn't all that convincing. So doubt is not the way I would frame this. I have a curiosity about the world. I'm willing to listen to any piece of information, to read any work of literature or nonfiction or whatever, and take in that information and evaluate it. And I feel strong enough in my skills to say, I'm fine with learning anything. And if it can change my mind, it changes my mind. And I'm not afraid of that. So I don't deal with doubt. I don't worry about it. I just go out in the world and I say, hey, what is likely true today? What do we know? What do I think I understand about the world? And I can change my mind. I am free to do that. That's not a worry. I think this is a worry for Christians who have to worry about what the evidence is. Are they fulfilling their God's commands? And they're worried about sin and things of that nature. It's not a real worry for atheists, because it's like, just bring us whatever you've got. If you can be firm in your evaluation of information, I don't think these things worry you as much. Anyway, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on these 5 questions I answered? I might go dig a few more. I think some of these questions are unique and interesting and worth exploring a little bit, but we'll see. But if you have something to say, put it in the comments below. While you're down there, you can like, subscribe, and do all the YouTube stuff. Push any YouTube buttons. You're on YouTube, you know what to do. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. Link is in the description below. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.